If you've been around my channel for a bit, you'll know about how much I love the Chinese tanks. My most played tank is the Type 62, which I bought on release and has been one of my favorite tanks since then. So when I first heard about the WZ-132-1 line coming to Blitz, I was very excited in hopes of it being like the Type 62 just at tier 10. And believe it or not, despite its popularity being rather lackluster, I actually really enjoy playing this tank. But maybe not for the reason most people might think. This tank is considered one of the worst tier 10 light tanks in the game by quite a bit of people. And you know what? That's exactly why I like it. Not only does it feel like a Type 62 at tier 10, but there is something really satisfying about playing underplayed / underpowered tanks and doing really well with them. Notice how I say underpowered, which begs the question, is this tank actually bad? Well, let's take a look comparing it to all the other tier 10 lights. It has the second best DPM right behind the Vickers. It also has the second best penetration right behind the Vickers. I'm not including the Sheridan here because it has this big derpy gun, but the 132 has the highest alpha damage at 360, which is really nice for a light tank. It shares the same gun caliber as the Batchat and Vickers. The 132's shell velocity is not bad at all, but yet it is worse than all the other light tanks other than the Sheridan. Moving down to weapon handling, the 132 has phenomenal aim time, better than all the other light tanks. While it has more dispersion than the Vickers, it still has an accurate gun when fully aimed in. Now, unfortunately, this is where the tank starts to take a turn for the worse. All the other lights have better dispersion altogether when moving. It also gets 5 degrees of gun depression. This tank cannot shoot down to save its life. Moving down to mobility, it only gets worse, but fear not. This tank is by no means slow and can still reach high speed very quickly. While it has some of the worst engine performances out of all of these tanks, this tank is not sluggish at all. Moving down to the miscellaneous category, it has the second best view range right underneath the Batchat, and it shares the same amount of health with the T100, which is also the highest. Finally, its armor. This tank has horrible hull armor. Its turret is also weak, however, it does have the most amount of frontal armor out of all these tanks, and I have bounced quite a few shots with it. Before I give my opinion of this tank, I'm going to talk about the special mechanic it gets, and also a little bit of history with this tank's balancing. Normally in World of Tanks Blitz, it takes 10 seconds to go invisible after being spotted. Adaptive concealment makes this 7 seconds. It also lets you see what tank is spotting you if the enemy tank is also spotted. Before the 10.3 update, this tank used to have less alpha and a faster reload for more DPM. Back then, this tank was quite tricky to play, and even I struggled with it a few times. Eventually, I got used to it, and I loved using it as a damage farmer. With the 10.3 update, however, they nerfed the reload and buffed the alpha, which made the DPM worse in the process. While it has less DPM now than it did back then, I wouldn't say it's necessarily worse. You see, the thing is, if you run calibrated shells instead of gun rammer, to make your DPM worse, your reload becomes 7 seconds. What that means is by the time you shoot and reload, you will be unspotted. Other than the Sheridan, it has nice alpha damage too, which is amazing for Pika booming. Now, I won't lie, I'm a damage farmer. I like to go for high damage games. So much so that I used to run gun rammer on the 132 even after 10.3. I soon realized though that there were select situations where the gun rammer was nice, but calibrated shells is definitely the way to go. Another thing about calibrated shells, it adds 30 extra millimeters of pen to its heat rounds, making it much more versatile against heavier armored opponents. Like I said earlier, I love this tank. It really does feel like a tier 10 version of the Type 62 to me. I can see why people struggle with playing this tank because it really isn't like anything else in the game. Adaptive concealment makes this tank incredibly sneaky, combined with good view range. you can pull off some really nasty scouting. If the enemy team doesn't have a bat chat, that is. The same reason I love the 121 is another reason why I love this tank. Incredibly fast aim time, meaning you can stop on the dime and be super aimed in and ready to shoot. I will say though that the gun depression really makes this tank a pain sometimes. While the T100 LT also has 5 degrees of gun depression, it also has troll armor, which this tank doesn't have. Me personally, I love the way this gun feels. It hits hard and is dead shot accurate. It is very fun to play around with. As far as mobility goes, this tank isn't quick, but it is fast. Once you get going, you can get into position quite quickly. One of my favorite ways to play this tank is like playing how scouting works in World of Tanks PC. I feel like in Blitz, getting early pot shots while spotting and then in return you get spotted and have to back up is always how I've personally played this game when it comes to light tanks. I could very well be in the wrong here, but I do find myself winning a lot more games because of it. I digress though. What I mean is getting into a really aggressive forward bush and sitting there and not shooting or moving. You obviously can play any light tank like this, but this tank in particular is really good at it. The reason is because while you're in an aggressive bush, chances are, if you get spotted, the enemy that spotted you is going to be spotted first, meaning you can pull back before they even have time to react to spotting you. Now, what about the tech tree line? I had so much fun playing this tech tree, except one tank. Please, for the sake of your sanity, if you have free experience, skip the tier 8. Do not play the tier 8. But everything else, the tiers 6, 7, and 9 are very fun to play. My first ever tank review was actually on the tier 9 tank, and I still stand by what I said in that video. I do think another reason why I'm such a big fanatic over this tank and line is because, like I said earlier, I love the Type 62. So despite my bias towards Chinese light tanks to begin with, I still think I would enjoy this tank despite that. So, is this line worth playing? Personally, I think it is. While currently there are better light tanks, this tank is certainly an experience worth grinding for if you're a fan of peek-a-boom scouting gameplay. Thank you all so much for watching, God bless, and I hope to see you in my next video.